G'day, I'm Mark Hoth and welcome to Swift Almanac. In the last lesson, we can log in and auto log in with our data saved to core data and user defaults. And we have a tidy launch screen. This lesson, we'll be adding Game Center login, and we're going to be prettying up our app with an app icon and learning some pretty advanced stuff due to the Game Center being non-trivial. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is get a copy of our source code. So go to clone. Start with login 3, that's our base, and if you want the final, get login 4. Let's save it on the desktop. That's where we left off last time. So the first thing we need to do with GameKit is let our app subscribe to the GameKit service. So if we go to login and capabilities, you'll see that there's this Game Center option, and we need to turn that on, and we get this error message that's saying add the Game Center feature to your app ID. Now, if we go back to general, our display name is login and our bundle identifier is .login. We'll make that a lowercase l so it looks like a domain name. And then we'll need to go into our developer account, choose certificates, identifiers and profiles, and then over here identifiers, app IDs, and I've already created one, but essentially you click the plus button. You call it something like login. You use an explicit app ID, so mine is com.swiftalmanac.login, and you'll see that Game Center is selected by default, as is in-app purchase, and you go continue, and it will say confirm your app ID, go register and done. You can check it out. It says Game Center is enabled for development and distribution, so we're all good there. And then we need to go back to our account, and we need to go to iTunes Connect. iTunes Connect is where we upload our apps to the App Store. So we'll click on My Apps, and I've already got some, but we will hit the plus sign, create a new app. Okay, there's our login 3, iOS, login 3. I will choose Australian English, SKU can be anything, and we create the app. Give me anything that doesn't have a space in it. Then go down to Features, click on Game Center. Okay, so we need to add some sort of game facility, so we will add a leaderboard. The reference name can be anything. The leader ID board has to be something. Our formatter, or our format type, is going to be an integer, and we're going to have a best score from highest to lowest. And we need to add one language, and we'll choose Aussie English. Our formatter, we're going to have commas, the other alternative is dots. And our score is going to be measured in points. So it will be a point for the singular and points for the plural, and we're not going to upload an image. We will save that and save that, and that is allowing us to do everything we need in order to use Game Center. So going back to our application, we go back to capabilities, and luckily for us, we now have all three of these ticks, which means where all systems go. If we go back to general, if you've got a problem, then the default project has a capital L here. It might just be that you need to put a lowercase, but this bundle identifier must exactly match, in case sensitivity, the bundle identifier in the App Store. So we'll also go to our main storyboard, and on our login screen we will add a button, and we will also add a label. We will quickly do some constraints to the bottom neighbor by 16. Height and width, we'll make the width 100. Put in another constraint. That constraint I want to change to center X. And the label itself, we want to center the text and place "or" as the filler. And then the button, we will take our Game Center icon, put that in here, go back to our storyboard, and on our button we can have an image of type Game Center, and then we will again put that 16 above the neighbor, set the height and width, I'm not quite sure, I think it's 72 and 72, and we'll again have to center it. Center X 0, and then let's move it up here. Get rid of the constraint we don't need. Okay, so now we have the option to, well, firstly, let's go to our assistant editor. Find our login view controller and create an outlet called GC button, just in case we want to change that in the future. And then down the bottom here, let's create an action for when we click on the Game Center button. Change that to an action type. Make this a UI button. Okay, so that's our storyboard out of the way. Now we've got a couple of things up here. So we're just changing these to greater than rather than equal to, and the warnings will disappear. But it doesn't like that one if we do it that way. So let's go back and put that back in. Okay, maybe it should be less than or equal to. That's better. Okay, now the thing with Game Center is not something that your application can log into and log out of. Game Center is a service that runs on the iPhone or iPad, and the iPhone or iPad is logged in. So for Game Center, we need to test whether or not we are already logged in or already logged out. And if they click on this button, we can send people out to the Apple settings icon, and then they can log in or log out from the settings icon. It is possible to log in from here, but for reasons I'll cover shortly, we're not going to do it that way. Now we're just going to move away from programming for a second. Game Center, I found, works a lot better when you're loading your development environment onto your phone directly rather than using the simulator. It's easier to flick between the Game Center in settings and test things out. So basically, up here, you're able to choose whatever you want to simulate, but you can also connect a device, an iPad or a phone, use your USB cable, and when you plug it in, it will do all this and turn up. It might ask you to authenticate it with a dialog button and a dialog up on screen, and you can say yes and do all that kind of stuff. But if you select the device as iPhone, then every time you build it, it's going to build to your phone rather than a simulator. So you can do either of those things. Now, so while we're divulging or diverting away from source code, we probably want to have a pretty little icon rather than the nasty ones that's default. So if you have an icon that you want to use, there's a lovely little website called Make App Icon, I think. And it's free, so you choose a file. I take my Swift file. Now, I think it recommends that you use, there it is there, best results for images with 1536 by 1536 pixels. So this image is not that size, but I think it's 1024 by 1024. It will put your image in the toaster, and after a little while, enter an email. So you type in your email address and click on, you probably don't want to subscribe to their every second week newsletter, but you do want to include the icons for the iWatch. And then you click on the download button. And then quite shortly after that, you will receive an email, and you can download that file, put it on your desktop, and unzip it. You can throw away the zip file, and then in the folder there will be Android, iMessage, iOS, and WatchKit. If you go into iOS and you take this app icon set and go to your assets folder, which is in the models, you'll see there's an empty app icon there, but just copy this app icon set into the box. It'll create app icon 2, and it will nice and neatly put all of the right icons in all the spaces available. I've got 4 that are unassigned, so just delete all the unassigned ones, because as you see, we've got a message up the top that we want to get rid of. Highlight them and delete them. As I said, I'm missing one icon, but that's okay because it's for the App Store. Delete app icon generic just by hitting the backspace or delete key, and rename app icon to be app icon 1 to be app icon. And now when your app target comes up, you get a nice little icon there, and when you build it, it will use that icon on your phone. Even if we use the simulator, Okay, so you can see that now instead of getting the I don't have an icon, that your pretty little icon will turn up there, and you'll have the closer to the beginnings of a real app. So with Game Center, what we need to do is conform to a Game Center delegate. Now this delegate is a singleton, and one of the features of singleton is we can only load it once for the application, and so the place to do this is in our own app delegate. So following what we did previously in our good programming practices, we're going to create a new file under extensions. It will be a Swift file, and we're going to call it app delegate plus Game Center. I'm Australian, we spell Game Center differently to the Americans who are watching this. We will need to import the game kit, and then we are going to create an extension of the app delegate, and we're going to use this delegate here, the GK Game Center Controller Delegate. Control click on this name and jump to the definition. There is this public function Game Center View Controller did finish that's mandatory as part of the protocol. And so we will have that, and it does absolutely nothing except get rid of the error message. So what we actually want to do is we want to create a method function that we're going to call check game center. And then we create this variable, or this constant local player, from the global GK local player dot local player, and then we have to create this authenticate handler, which is going to return a view controller and an error. And we want to check out the value of this view controller. Then we want to do something. Otherwise, we want to do something else. So if this view controller, this is a view controller that actually allows us to log in from within the application. If the view controller doesn't equal nil, that means that people aren't logged in. And we want to show the Game Center login. Otherwise, they are logged in. And we can check this. Game Center has a player ID for every person who's logged in, and we can go if local player dot is authenticated. If that's true, then we want to move to the home controller, and otherwise we want to display the Game Center login. So in this case, the view controller is nil, and that means that we're not logged in and we're not quite sure what's going to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to user defaults, and we're going to create in our copy of user defaults some extra variables that will help us specifically for Game Center. So our three variables are we using Game Center or using Game Center, which is a Boolean, and on initialization that's going to be false. We're also going to have another variable is in background, which is Boolean, and we're in false, and it'll be turned to true if we go into the background. And finally, we're going to have this GameKit player ID, which is going to be an empty string to start off with. And if someone is logged into GameKit, we want to grab that ID so we can track their status. So let's fix up this is in background field. If we go to app delegate, there's a whole swag of methods here, and we need to find the right one. And the first one, application will resign active. Use this method to pause ongoing tasks, disable timers, and invalidate graphics rendering callbacks. Games should use this method to pause the game. And so what we want to do is set our defaults.shared dot is in background to true when this event happens. So as I said, GameKit configuration or login occurs in the settings app, and so for people to log in or log out, or even if people switch, every time that you switch out of your application, there's a possibility that someone goes into settings and logs out of GameKit, and someone else could even log in and we could get a different player. So essentially we're setting this flag saying you better check to see if the player has changed. So let's go back to our app delegate here. So we've got a player that's authenticated. Let's set those values and see what happens. So our defaults.shared .gk player ID, that's going to be equal to local player .player ID. Our defaults.shared is in background equals true. Yes, we want to unwrap that string. So we can force unwrap this because we know that they're authenticated, and if someone's authenticated, it's mandatory. We know that this string this optional string is going to have a value because we know that someone is logged in. And are we using GameKit? Which is true. Sorry, we need to set this to false. Now the other thing we want to do, because we're now using GameKit, is we want to save our defaults with empty values so that our other login facilities aren't being utilized, because you can only log in and authenticate with one system. And if someone's authenticating with GameKit, then they're not authenticating with our user ID and password. So we just go our defaults.shared, save user defaults. Our string is going to be empty, our password is going to be empty, and our auto login is going to be false. Now the other thing we need to do is create this function called move to home controller. And I'm going to create that as a global function. And that function does exactly what previously we've done in terms of getting the navigation controller for the home screen. Now we're also going to need another function which is going to be move to the login controller, which I'm also going to make globally, which as you can see is going to do the it's going to load up the login view controller if that is needed. Okay, so this check game center function, what this is doing is it's creating our initial point of contact with the Game Center service. So we need to do this as soon as possible. So we do it in app delegate, and the place to do it is up here in our app delegate file. At the did finish launching with options, we need to add calls in here to let the Game Kit or the Game Center service know that we are going to be making calls to it. So from within here, we just simply want to call check Game Center, and that's an internal method because this is an extension of app delegate, and so this is going to be called pretty much when the application starts, or very soon after it's started. And what this authenticated handler is doing is it's saying every time there is a authentication issue, if someone logs in, logs out, if we want to look at this view controller or not, then run this closure. So you can see here that this is from here to here, this is a closure, and that's going to run in background and stay in background for as long as this local player thing is happening, and it's happening the entire time the app is open and running. So this can take messages all the time. If you switch in and out of your app, this source code is going to be called each time if the Game Kit is invoked. So it won't be called if nothing happens, but if someone logs out and logs in, then this code is going to tell us about the sign out, and it's going to tell us about the sign in. And that's why we need to record this Game Kit player ID, because if the player ID changes, that means that someone's logged out and someone's logged back in. We also need to check this local player is authenticated, because if it's not authenticated, then someone's changed from being logged in to just being logged out, and we need to handle those eventualities. Okay, so to display the Game Center login, we need the following code. It's pretty simple. We get our app delegate and we find out our current root view controller. We set that to current view controller, and then from the current view controller, we just present the view controller that we've been passed, which we know is non-nil. So if it's a value, then it's essentially the memory address of the view controller that we need. We pass it that view controller. We can use the forced symbol to get the actual value rather than the optional, and we can do that because we know it's not nil and true and completed. And that view controller is the view controller that's handled by GameKit, so we don't need to do anything about it. But when it returns, it's going to call this enclosure, and then we need to handle all of the eventualities. So getting down to the else statement, this is when people are logged in because the view controller is nil, which means they're automatically authenticated. So let's look at what we need to handle there. So the first case is if the local player is authenticated. So what's happened here is we haven't received a view controller, so this is the most likely case. If someone's using GameKit, then they're already logged in. We don't need to display a please log in application. They logged in last time or 1,000 times before, or the first time they get their iPhone. They're automatically logged in. We don't have a view controller, and they're going to be authenticated. So we need to set up all of these values again. So we just copy and paste them from above. I called it home screen, so you will be downloading a copy that says screen. So let's use the right terms. Okay. Now the problem with this is it's possible that someone has, because this code can be called more than once, just because they're authenticated doesn't mean it was the same user who was authenticated last time. So if I'm logged in as me and then I start running the game, we're going to store the local player ID as this GameKit player ID. We're going to log out and we're going to get that in background going to true. Then when we come back in, if someone's logged in as a different player, then the player ID will be different. So we're going to need to check for that eventuality. So the way we do that is we need an if statement. Okay, so we need an if statement, and there's two eventualities. The first eventuality is that they were logged out before, and so the GK player ID is 0, which is our default value, or it's empty, which is our default value. So we need to check for that. .shared .gk player ID. If it's empty, or if what we currently have equals the local player dot player ID. Okay, so this is the case where we don't have a view controller. We check to see if someone's authenticated, and it says that they are authenticated. Now, we're not sure whether or not this is the first time we've seen them or the 5th time we've seen them. So what we need to do is we say, if the default is empty, that is, there's no one here before and they've just logged in for the first time, so this is the initial case. Or the second one is, if it's the same person who logged in last time, then save all this stuff and go straight to the home screen, and they might continue on their game if you've got a pause, or they might just start the game. And we're only doing logging, we're not worrying about game states currently. So that's the first case, and then the alternative to that is, this is where someone has logged in and then gone into settings, logged out, and then someone new is logged in, or maybe they've got two IDs or whatever, but they've basically switched player IDs. So the player has logged out and logged in as someone else. So we need some sort of alert telling people that's what's happened, and then someone else is logged in, so they're logged in, so we need to move to the home screen. Now again, obviously the new person is not going to take over from the old person's game or whatever, where you're going to need to either save a game or abort the game, or whatever you do in that typical game state. We're not worried about the game states at the moment. We're just worrying about navigating through to the correct windows. Now I'm going to create a generic alert function. So we just got this function called Game Center Alert. We covered alerts last time. It takes as a parameter the message string. It does everything that we normally do. It just has a general title called Game Center. So all the alerts for the Game Center are going to have Game Center at the top, and then we're going to pass the message parameter to it. It's just going to have an OK box. It's just going to say, howdy doody, present the alert, and by default when you click OK it disappears. So here we just need to go Game Center Alert, and the message can be a new user has logged in. Okay, so now we have to deal with a couple of other cases. So this is the case if they're authenticated. What if they're not authenticated? And there's a couple of things that could happen there. If they're not authenticated, and remember, we're calling this as the first application. So if they're not authenticated by Game Center, then they might be auto logging in with their user ID and passwords. So we need to check our defaults. So if auto login is true, then we want to go straight to the home screen. Okay, now it could be that they're not authenticated, because they've signed out and they're not auto logging in. So we need to check if we've been into background. If is in background was set to true, so that's true, then what do we need to do there? So if is in background was true, then what we need to do, we've signed out because we're not authenticated, so we need to move to the login screen. We also need to use our Game Center alert and have a message saying user is logged out. And again, we'll need to also check our state, and we should also set our defaults.shared is in background to false. And then finally, if all else fails, then we just want to move to the login screen. And that's sort of our initial case. Now I'm just going to change one thing. If we go to our app delegate, where I've got this our default shared is in background equals true, I only really care about that if we've got a player who's logged in. Because if a player's not in, I don't care. We don't need to worry about this, and it's not going to occur. So it's not is empty, so i.e. it has a value. That's all we need to do there. Okay, so when we were looking at our launch screen previously, we had this send to first screen, which we now no longer need because that's all going to our that's all being done through the Game Center stuff in the app delegate. It's done before the launch view screen, and this load view to appear is going to occur. So now we've got this check Game Center. It's actually checking the login state of everything at the beginning of our application. So the things that we had previously, and we've created these global functions, move to home screen and move to login screen, so we can tidy up the rest of our code. So if we go to the home view controller, we've got this logout action which goes to the login screen. So we can just get rid of that, and we can call the global function move to login screen. So initially when our launch screen came up, we had this 3-second delay, and then we would where we would load the user defaults, and then that would make some determination about which window we would go to. Now we've duplicated all of that code and inserted it into our Game Center code. So we don't need this code here at all. And if we go to our app delegate, at the very start here, we don't need the dispatch queue. We just need to load the user defaults before we call check Game Center. So if we go to user defaults here, okay, we won't need these prints anymore because we've done all that kind of stuff, and we don't need this auto login stuff occurring on the load of user defaults because it's a lot more complex now, and it's being handled by that Game Center code that we've just written. We can also get rid of these print statements. So loading user defaults is now just loading the values into memory and setting these initializers in our initial state. If we go to the login view controller, everything there remains the same. However, on the home view controller, you might remember that we had this UI bar button item, and the thing is with Game Center is you can't log in and log out of of Game Center from within an application, because it's only available for the whole phone. So we want to disable this logout button if we are logged into Game Center. If that's our authentication method, Game Center, then we want to dim this button so people can't log in. So we do that by just saying logout button dot is enabled equals our defaults dot shared dot using GameKit, and it's actually, if we're not using GameKit, it's enabled, so we use the not sign. Okay, that's one error down. Let's see where we've got these errors and do some compiling. There you go, just one little brace and you get rid of all those error messages. So there's our Game Center login, and we can sign in here with an Apple ID and password. So once we've logged in, we've got this welcome back at the top, and we've moved to the home controller, and we can't log out. So if we find our way back to settings, go down to Game Center, log out of Game Center, we get our error message saying Game Center user has logged out. So the app has been running in background here, and we've got that logged out message, and it's now taken us back to our login screen. We can click on the, so we're on our login view controller here. We'll select that over here, and we created this GC action button, and this code here allows us to open up the settings. So it basically says there's a settings URL, and that is a URL of this UI application open settings URL string supplied by the operating system. It may or may not exist, and so we will use a guard statement to protect ourselves, and we'll return and do nothing nicely if it's not there. But otherwise, if it is, we will call our UI application shared delegate, and we'll go, can we open this settings URL? And if we can open it, we will open it. We've got this little thing saying, hey, it's successful. So we'll run it again. We don't want to log in. So, but I did want to log in, so we click on this, and it's going to take us to settings. And then you can log in, or you can just come back and log in as we used to. And that takes us to the home controller, and logout is displayed now. So that's a full implementation of GameKit login. There you go, Game Center is implemented, and we can still use our username and password that's been saved to core data and user defaults. Next lesson, we will be adding the CloudKit, so look out for that coming soon. If you have any questions about this tutorial, then please leave a comment below or hit me up on Twitter @SwiftAlmanac. Please subscribe to the channel, it's free, and check out our website at www.swiftalmanac.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.